Hello everyone. The easiest way of learning is to get your hands dirty. Now I'll create a simple Spring Boot application. I hope you do it along. For my development, I am using Eclipse IDE. Before you start your Spring project, make sure you have necessary plugins installed from Eclipse Marketplace. Search for Spring Tools. I have the Spring Tools installed already. This makes Eclipse to add support for Spring. You need Build Tool integration plugin as well. It can be either Gradle or Maven. Since I'm planning to develop a Spring project using Gradle as build tool, here you see I have Gradle plugin installed already. Well, what is a build tool? This might confuse you if you are not aware of what a build tool is. I'll explain this at the end of the video. Alright, I have necessary plugins installed. Let's proceed to the project. Spring Boot is magic. It is amazing how quickly you can set it up. Go to File, New, and in this wizard you see Spring Starter project and Spring Legacy project. Spring Legacy project will help you create Spring project that do not use Spring Boot. Select Spring Starter project to create a Spring Boot project. I'll leave my project name as My First Spring, and this is a selection for build tool. I'll leave it as Gradle. A build tool basically helps to compile code and transport some libraries to your project. We'll explain more on this in the end, and also on group, artifact and version. I'm using Java 8 version here, and I'll leave everything else default. Proceed to next. You can add all supporting libraries here. If you're working on a project which integrates with NoSQL database, you could add supporting library here, or you could add it later. I'll leave everything else default. As you see, it clearly states that you have created a Spring Boot project. This source folder is where you put the actual application code, and here you could add your front-end resources like HTML and JSP templates. Here you add some test cases. I call them guinea pig code, with which you test your own code. Here you have many Spring dependencies and other libraries. Libraries or dependencies simply means instead of writing everything from scratch, you pull up a library or a commonly used feature which was written by some other developer. This Gradle file is for build configuration, where you define the configuration to compile and package your application. Here you see Spring conveniently added the starter dependencies or supporting libraries for you. We'll see what repositories and dependencies are later. Spring created this main class with a main method in that, and these are called annotations. There is a lot going behind this each annotation which makes developers' life easy. These annotations are created to reduce the effort of writing the same code for commonly used function. Also, if this annotation doesn't exist, one had to deal with XML files to register your classes or methods in Spring. In main method, you see Spring application class, which will configure default settings and launches your Spring application. Let's run the application now. Run as Spring Boot app. Here in the console, you see Spring performed some default settings and got your Spring Boot application up and running. Now you can customize or develop according to your business logic or requirement. Now I'll create an API or a resource for user or another application to interact with this application. These are actually called REST APIs, which is a vast topic and I'll not cover in this video, but understand it as a web resource to interact with the application. We'll complete the API first and see how it looks, and then we'll see what's behind the scenes. Now I'll create a class I'll name it my first web resource, and I'll leave everything else default and finish. To create an API, I need this at REST controller annotation. As you see, there is an error here. This annotation seems to be not available as I haven't added supporting dependency. Dependencies are added in build.gradle file, where Gradle fetches it from a repository. Now open the browser. Open Maven Central and look for this Maven repository, Central Maven repository, and search for Spring Starter Web. We are searching for a Spring Starter Web dependency in the Maven Central repository, and here click on the latest version. Since I am using Gradle, I'll copy this Gradle format. Add this line in your build.gradle file. Perform Gradle refresh to reload the dependencies. Going back to the class I created, I'll import this REST controller from Spring Framework Web Dependency. Well, it resolved now. As you have added the supporting library for web dependency right now, so it resolved REST controller annotation for us. Now let's run the application. As you see in the console, it started Tomcat on port 8080. Tomcat is a web application server. After I added web dependency and at REST controller annotation, Spring Boot detected the need of application server and it started Tomcat. Let's see this in the browser. Enter localhost and our server is running on port 8080. It gives a white label error page because we have our servers ready, but there is no resource or API created for user to use. By adding at REST controller annotation, I made this class eligible to receive request from a user or another application. This one annotation is a combination of multiple annotations like at controller and at response body. I'll now create a resource where user can request for some information. Write a method which returns string. Welcome is my method name, and I'll just return hello plus today's date. Well, let's run and see if something changed in browser. Nothing. All I did was just created a Java function. I need to define an address for the function I have written. There is no address to this specified function. There are different HTTP methods like get, post, put, and head. Now I'll define the address. imported from the Spring Web dependency. This is the address of the function which I have written. Now I actually did the mapping for the request to certain address. Now let's run the application again and see. As I have defined my function at address welcome, tada! It returned hello with today's date. But I would need to append some space in between hello and the date. It's working. We wonder what's going behind the scenes on how application mapped this request to certain function. I have some examples pulled up here. Here the client, as in me, made a HTTP request to /welcome. This request is first received by Dispatcher Servlet. Dispatcher Servlet is like a friend desk staff which will route the request to the class where the address is present with the help of handler mapping. Then it will be mapped to the appropriate method in the class, and the response will be returned to the client using the same at-rest controller annotation which has an integrated at-response body annotation in it. I'll create another function which accepts input from user and greets the user. I'll name my method greet. With mapping address at /greet, and I want to greet the user with their name. Add a placeholder. In the method arguments, add @path variable annotation. With placeholder name to fetch the input and store it in a variable. And return hello with username. Let's run and see the result. As I have defined the request /greet, this is where you input your name. As you see, the response is customized with the name you entered. That's all for now. Please join me in my next video to understand what dependencies and what a build.gradle file does. Thank you.